Welcome, everyone, to this Executive Insights webinar on how to maximize your value on advisory boards. My name is Jan Easton. I'm a fellow of the Advisory Board Center. I'm a certified chair, and I'm a member of the global faculty. And I'm an absolute fan of our guest today, Renee Lahti. You're a fellow advisory board chair, and you're also a specialist in the area of portfolio career. Renee, welcome. Do you want to just give maybe a little bit of an overview of what's brought you to this advisory board space?
Sure. So thank you. And aloha, Jan. It's good to see you and everyone that's tuned in. So I'm about a 20-year plus executive in the tech space and the transformation space, and was really looking to figure out how do you take that and maximize it to pay it forward even more efficiently than you have the last 20 years in a way that leaves companies making the decisions. You're just the coach on the sidelines, helping them be more successful. And I came across Advisory Board Center and their program, both their subject matter expert and their chair program, and really found that it clicked to fill that continuous education component for my career.
Excellent. And Renee, I really am looking forward to you sharing some of your experiences in this space, because what we know is the professional body for the advisory sector is there's a really rich history around advisory boards, and there's a lot of diversity in the way that advisory boards are used in the market and the people that actually participate in this space. So the Advisory Board Center's role as the global professional body is to really bring a strong ethical foundation to the sector, to create a best practice way of working and really raise the standard of the profession for the individuals that operate in this space, like the two of us, but also for the organizations that we serve. So what we're really seeing, though, is the advisory board market is the growth has been incredible across the globe. And so really, it's a supply and demand side of things. There are more individuals that are moving into this portfolio career space, but there are a lot more organizations that are looking to leverage the flexibility and the adaptability of advisory boards. So our research has indicated the bulk of that market really sits in the US. And I'd love to be able to gain a little bit of your insight, Renee, into what you think is really driving, I guess, both the participation of individuals in the advisory board space, but the adoption of advisory boards by organizations, certainly in the tech space that you operate.
Sure. So I kind of will put a couple hats on. One, so as a SME Tech Advisory Board member, I'm pulled onto being an advisory board for that 20 plus years when the dinosaurs roamed the earth when I started my career, that component, but then also as a board certified board chair. But also my other perspective is I am the co-community chair for the Americas. So myself and another colleague are seeing the demand firsthand as we facilitate quarterly meetings just in the Americas to help bring in and have a great candid discussion about what's happening in the Americas. And I think it starts, number one, with we all look for certifications or validation when we're executives. And when I would go hire a supplier or whatever, you want references and you want validation certification. And what I think has happened with the advisory board rapid growth, as you talked about, Jan, is there's also the need to say, well, so how do I know what I'm looking for? Or is there, quote, the good housekeeping seal of approval as we have in the US? Like, well, how do I know that? And I think part of the challenge we have is how do you measure, things like emotional independence, agnostic opinion, decision rights remain with the entity and not with the consulting member. And so I think that becomes part of this growth on both I want to be in the advisory board. I want certification. I want something that says, yes, I know how to do that work and people will recognize that currency. And the flip side, because I think COVID has had a huge impact on that, companies are growing differently. They have different problems now than they have before COVID. And like, well, who else can be a subject matter expert on something? How quickly can I get a SME, a something to help me? And governance boards are really great, but those are lengthy processes and they're institutions. They're not help quick. I need an idea, brainstorm with me. And that, I think, is where the advisory board, the agility comes into play, albeit with framework, but still that agility component is, I think, really an important component that makes the demand just, I think, accelerate now.
Absolutely. And I think you touched on a couple of really interesting points that really resonated with me. And one of those is around this idea of the validator. So credentials really help to validate someone in the market, but there's also a trust accelerator element because a lot of organizations are having to move outside of their known networks and connect in with people to help them do things they've never done before. Right? Confront challenges or exploit opportunities that they've never faced before. And that really requires them to go outside of those very close networks. So when I meet someone, what does good look like? What are those sort of trust accelerators? And I think this is why, from an organizational perspective, having a really strong foundation to a best practice advisory board is so valuable. So it's not just a matter of saying, I want to have an advisory board one day and I'll get a collection of interesting people to talk around a table. Having a process and a considered process to work through really, I think, gives good structure to the practitioners, but it gives a lot of structure to the organization. So I'd like to dig in a little bit to what best practice looks like with you, if we can. So the Advisory Board Center, through the Global Research Council, developed the world first best practice framework for advisory boards to really be able to help address this question of what does good look like? How do we know that we're actually approaching this in a structured way? So having really three focus areas around people, purpose, and process that are supported by 5 best practice principles in this space. It's really been transformative, I think, in my own professional practice, but for the industry as well. And I'd like to really just get your thoughts from a practitioner standpoint, Renee. Why has the Best Practice Foundation been valuable for you in the work that you do?
Well, I think it comes back to that measuring stick and emotional independence. I mean, think of those 2 words, emotional independence. How do you measure that? And it's a very country by country, culture by culture, industry by industry construct a little bit. But what I think the Advisory Board Center has done is, through your people, process, and purpose framework, you kind of given us all tools, whether we're going to be the chair and sit and govern, for a leader of an organization, or we're a subject matter expert. We have in our minds, when we come to the table, emotional independence. The decision rights still remain with that entity. And it's very, very clear when you accidentally drift over the line. You're emotionally committed. You want to see them successful. I think that's a common trait for all of us that are advisory board certified. But you also know what the box is, albeit an agile box. The sides move a little bit. But I think the certification to give credibility and a measuring component to emotional independence is probably the number one thing across all of these. The chart that really you have on the board here that talks about fit for purpose, independence. You can measure it. There is some structure and discipline. It's not just some colleague you knew from your industry. And then clarity of scope. And again, if you don't understand intent with some kind of clarity walking into it, it's very hard to be the best you can be to help that entity be successful.
And we share some common elements to our own portfolios and working with technology-based businesses. And I think when I started to move into this space, one of the things that I personally struggled with was there was a lot of this is what you should do around the advisory board space. If you sort of Googled, as a technology business, how do I set up an advisory board, or how do I compensate advisory board members? And there was lots of should do's out there saying things like, you should give equity in return, or you should set this up this way. And for myself, I actually found that challenged my personal concept of what independence looked like and what that looked like in practice. And I found that the best practice framework has really equipped me with a new way to kind of socialize what is ethical practice. And you touch on a really important point, which it's about a strong foundation, but a flexible implementation. So I find that the best practice framework allows me to have a really intelligent conversation with the organizations I work with about what's important to you for your advisory board and the way that you want to adopt this as a professional structure within your business. And what does independence look like in this context, right? And how are we actually going to value that? Do we value it? what does that look like? And so for a lot of the early stage organizations I worked with, they've actually sort of bucked the trend about not actually going straight for that equity arrangement at the beginning, but looking to actually fund their advisory board in different ways, because it gives that concept of independence from the beginning. They're not necessarily tied to those people as advisors from an equity standpoint. That might be a conversation that opens up down the track, and it just creates, I guess, a different pathway for them to engage.
And that is true. And even the US, bucking that trend I've seen, and again, some of the work I've done, and it's back to, because I think both sides, both as the practitioner of an advisory board center approach, but also you're helping the institution or the agency or the individual, whoever you're helping, understand where those boundaries are. And they say the same thing. Well, wait, I really want the independence. That's the value of this. So how do we compensate, and how do we have that relationship to make sure those lines don't blur? So that conversation happens on both sides of an advisory board conversation. And I think it helps create, again, the boundaries so that we aren't squishing jello. I mean, 10 years ago, you say, oh, I need an advisory board. I need a board advisor. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? And that was me being one of those executives. Like, I'm not sure, but I know we need one. Well, now there's this framework that Advisory Board Center has, and it's super helpful because it reminds you also of the different language. I don't know about you, Jan, but my language is different when I put my advisory board role on. I know where the decisions are. The words aren't, well, you should do this, or how about approach it this way? It's more about, have you thought about, have you heard, what's your chart? I mean, you're asking curiosity and maybe uncomfortable questions, curious and uncomfortable questions, but as knowing that the answer, whatever it is, sits with that entity, that institution, that person that you're coaching.
Absolutely. So I guess as individuals, and you highlighted this in your introduction, we go through a personal journey ourselves as advisory board practitioners within this portfolio. The way I might deliver my value as a consultant should be different than the way that I deliver my value as an advisor or advisory board member. And it's different again as an executive, and different again if I'm sitting within a governance board or board of directors style table. And I think that requires personal discipline, but it also requires some really good education around that. You mentioned about being equipped with that language, about knowing, again, what does good look like? How do I do this differently? How do I challenge myself personally to add value in a new context? Often when we get to this stage, when we start thinking about adding value on an advisory board, you'd be comfortable in thinking, well, I've done a lot of things. I know what I'm doing. Just, give me a seat at the table. But actually investing in that professional practice, that's been valuable for you. It's certainly been valuable for me.
Yes, absolutely. And I think back to the trend part, there's great articles. I think Financial Times, I want to say that's it. They talk about the growing of that ethical independence trend that can actually help those governance boards by corporatizing an advisory board. And there's a lot of that happening. And I think it's for the things that aren't necessarily met by the other entities that are all great. No one's doing anything wrong, but it's a matter of how else you bring some thought leadership to the table independently, with advice, but still letting the decisions happen where they were intended to happen by the organization, startup, or somebody like an Aon or a Salesforce. They also have advisory boards for the very same reason. So scale does not impact who needs those advisory board emotional independent thoughts.
So with the 20 plus year career, quite an accomplished executive career, you would have built up a really strong profile and been well known in the market, Renee, and in the work that you do. Why was it important for you, though, to undertake? So you mentioned as an executive, you looked for credentials in other people as a validator, but having built up such a rich professional career and practice, why was it important for you personally to invest in your own professional development in this advisory board space?
Well, I think coming from the tech sector, Silicon Valley for years, and working with nonprofit, for-profit, tech and non-tech entities, companies as an executive, you're continuously humbled as if you're playing in the technology space. 2 to 4 years, if you don't like something, wait around long enough, it'll be reinvented and you have to relearn. So continuous education somewhat is in my blood. But secondly, I realized that I was trying to do this smart pivot in my career where I wasn't the decision maker, the decision right owner, but I did want to pay it forward to say, here's some fact patterns, here's some archetypes that regardless of industry, of which I've worked in many, these kind of themes show up. Have you considered this? Both in the startup world, which is now post-pandemic, you see a lot of it. And I think a lot of those aha moments can be shared out with those individuals, but with the right language. And so I went back to be certified, a certified chair, as well as a subject matter expert, to learn that language and learn how to reframe that problem, not as me owning it, but me emotionally, but independently committed to the success of some other stakeholder.
I'd like to maybe stop sharing the screen and just sort of open up the conversation to be able to share, I guess, some of your insights and tips to other people that might be looking at either moving into this advisory board space for the first time, or maybe they're looking to improve on their own professional practice in this space, and why that education and credentials can add a lot of value. So, Renee, I guess if we're sort of looking through this, when you had that first experience on advisory boards, you've mentioned that it was important for you to go out and start looking for credentials, but now we're starting to see organizations developing their own language and their own understanding of what good looks like. So as you're actually shifting from just the, I guess we'll call it the supply side of individual professionals wanting to move into this space, why do you think credentials are important on the organizational side? So those that are looking to demand advisory boards as part of their governance systems?
Well, I think if I look at, again, in the tech space, there's certifications of your vendors, your suppliers, whether it be security related or just bandwidth or ability to support an X thousand person organization. You need some validation so that you don't have to start from scratch. And I think for the boom and the rapid acceleration we're seeing around advisory boards, no one's doing anything wrong, but over time, you're starting to see that pattern. What really are those characteristics that you consistently need to be a successful advisory board member? It could just be a pop-up, one person. It doesn't have to be a huge board, or it could be something that's corporatized and becomes part of the institution of the company. But you need to have that consistency, because I think that, especially in the U.S., I think your chart said 45% in the United States, and that's huge. And we're a bunch of curious cowboy animals sometimes on how we go about doing things. But at some point, you want to say, what is that currency that I'm getting if I'm talking about having an advisory board member or institutionalizing an advisory board with a chair? And I think that's really critical to the places I've worked. I usually start with a coaching. It becomes, usually I come in through coaching or one-on-ones where people quietly are admitting, I don't know what I don't know, but I don't want to say it publicly yet. I apply the advisory board work there because over time that relationship grows into an even more trusted, independent, but emotional relationship to help that stakeholder and that company be more successful.
Yeah, I think that appreciating that kind of safe space that an advisory board can create for founders, for executives, and even for other advisors, because I know when more of my portfolio was weighted to consultant, being a subject matter expert, you were supposed to know everything. And so I often wore a little bit of an armor, a bit of veneer that would say, sure, I can do that, or yes, I know that, and then figure it out on the backside, right? But in this advisory board space, it also, I guess, challenges me to recognize where the edges are of my own knowledge and my own currency, and being able to have a really honest conversation around a table about that, about especially in the tech space, as you said, it can move so quickly. So I have history there, but there's elements of my history that may not be as current as someone else. But bringing that critical thinking lens to the conversation, as opposed to the decision-making lens to the conversation, or being bound by recommendations as I was as a consultant, or a view of the world that might have been shaped by the solution that I could specifically provide. It's just opened up a different way to, I guess, have a conversation, but also a different way for me to add value in this space. I get an incredible personal satisfaction about helping other people to unlock their thinking and critically assess what their options might be. But I'm also constantly learning in this space, and having a global community to be able to connect in with helps me keep my connections current as well. So I haven't lived in the States for over 20 years now, but being able to connect in with you, it's like a little bit of home every day.
Well, and the reverse. I've done a lot of work for a Japanese multinational and spent a lot of time in Asia Pacific, but it doesn't mean I've ever lived there full time. And so I guess it goes both ways. We have community chairs around the globe, and we can post. We back each other up all the time. We don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Matter of fact, we don't want to be. That's not part of the charter of being an advisory board member and supporting a stakeholder. But we know how to reach out and network in an amazing way with all of us with the same tools and language, as you said, Jen. So back at you to go back to Asia Pacific. I can connect back to you and the colleagues from Brisbane and all of the diversity that sits in Asia Pacific. And to be honest, that's sometimes where I get some of my best ideas to bring back to the States, because I'm a big curiosity design thinker. So sometimes you have to turn the problem or the challenge on its ear to really see better answers to coach your stakeholders.
That really brings that concept of independence as a nice bookend to the conversation, because as professionals, we're still independent of each other and independent thinkers ourselves, but we can really come together and collaborate to not only challenge, best practice in the market, but challenge each other's thinking, expand each other's thinking. And really it's a nice thing as a professional practitioner in this particular space to know that sometimes we're helping organizations go where they've never been before. And that's exciting, but sometimes a little bit daunting. So to be able to reach out to other people that share that common ethical foundation and be able to have a supportive style conversation, I think is valuable for me in this community. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to reach out to you, Renee, and my colleagues in the States in this space.
Well, we look forward for growing for all of those that are listening. The two of us have this casual but enjoyable conversation about the topic. Please reach out to both of us, and happy to further expand on what it is we do and how much we love what we do, which is, as I think we can tell by both of us talking like this, we absolutely enjoy this part of our career and enjoy helping all that's out there be more successful.
Absolutely. Now, Renee, if we just wrap up the conversation with maybe one tip. So what's one tip that you have for other professionals that might be looking to either move into this advisory board space for the first time, or might be looking to, I guess, improve on their own professional practice in this space if they're a bit more of an experienced operator?
Well, two things. So one, if you're thinking about this and you don't know a lot about it, I bet you're already doing it. I fell into this because I was doing this type of work with albeit rough and rugged language, something that was very much about how the advisory board sets up this framework. So you're probably already doing it. And when you actually get more curious to get involved with Advisory Board Center, you'll go, aha, I've been doing this all along. I didn't know it had a name. So that would be one for those that are in the I'm thinking about. And for those that have been doing the work for a while, especially in the US, I know there's lots of flavors of what a advisory, capital A, advisory, capital B board is. And I think for all of you that are in that mode, I think the graciousness that advisory board gives you in terms of IP usage and frameworks and creates that common language, common currency, common language will expand your opportunities as an advisory board professional, but it also gives you additional tools to help do what you obviously love doing and just accelerate it. And obviously grow a discipline that in the US, I think is probably needs to grow even faster because we desperately need this niche area for small to large organizations that need that extra help.
Renee, thank you so much for taking your time and for your generosity and allowing people to connect in with you and the support that you give of this professional community in the Americas. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen. It was great talking to you. Take care.